Welcome back, everybody. It's Zach here, bringing us another fantasy football video. In this one, my favorite video to make every single week, I'm going to be going over players that I would be looking to trade for ahead of Week 8. Trading is one of my favorite things to do in fantasy football, and I really do find that it is one of the best ways to improve your team over the course of the season, and it's also just one of the most fun parts of fantasy football, at least in my opinion. We're going to go over roughly 6 or 7 players today that I think are really strong trade candidates, guys that I'm looking to add to my roster this week, and guys that I think are really going to be great to help us down the stretch, whether it be either getting us into the playoffs or really setting us up for a really strong playoff run. Same time or same day as this video, I'll be also putting out a video going over players that I would be looking to sell high on or players that I would be kind of looking to move off of. So if you're looking for that video, make sure you watch that one as well. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. That way you don't miss any of the future content we put out. Again, 5 videos every single week. And then as always, if you have any specific trade questions, just let me know in the comments. I love interacting with you guys there. It's part of what makes this so much fun for me. So yeah, let's get into it, guys. So just to sort of keep ourselves honest, I'm going to start just quickly highlighting the guys that we touched on the week before. So last week we touched on Quinshon Judkins and Devonta Smith. Those two guys were clearly smash plays. Devonta Smith had a career high in receiving yardage yesterday, and Quinshon Judkins had 3 touchdowns. So good calls there. We also highlighted Lamar, Mark Andrews, and Brock Bowers. None of those 3 guys played this last week, so tough to really make a call there. And then I also highlighted Mike Evans as a quality buy low. Brutal injury there, season ender, probably near the end of him being fantasy relevant for his career, unfortunately. So miss there. Can't really do a whole lot with injury, but overall pretty satisfied with last week, and I will keep updating that as well so you guys can just sort of see how we're doing week to week. Starting things off here, we've got Rome Odunze, who seems to be one of my favorite buy lows right now. He's a guy that we really did sort of seem to be all on board in terms of him really leveling up and being like a clear wide receiver 1 in this offense, as a guy that really could step up and be like that fringe wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 for the entire rest of the season. It just hasn't really happened for the last couple weeks. You had 2 weeks ago, strong game plan. The Bears ran the ball really effectively, and then you had a touchdown called back due to a tic-tacky penalty. Just really wasn't one of those great days there for Rome there. You had DeAndre Swift get a lot done in the passing game. Just a tough break there out of the bye. And this last week, another just game script that didn't really go his way. You had a game where they were leading the whole time. Nobody did anything through the air for the Bears here. You had DJ Moore lead the team in receiving yards at 42. So it just wasn't really a game script that set itself up for Rome Odunze to be the clear, wide receiver 1 / wide receiver 2 in fantasy that we think he can be. Still ran 100% of the routes. He's the clear wide receiver 1 in Chicago, and I do think that better days are ahead. We know that Rome Odunze is incredibly talented. He's got a matchup with Baltimore in Week 8. Might just easily be a nuke there. It seems like Baltimore is one of, if not the worst defenses in the NFL. That game could easily turn into a score fest. Hopefully we get Lamar back, and that really just elevates the over-under for this game. I really do view him as like a high-end wide receiver 2 the rest of the season. I think that, you've had basically you had the bye and then 2 straight back-to-back weeks that weren't fantastic. People are probably getting a little bit hesitant there, but I do think better days are ahead from him. I think he's going to be a rock star the rest of the way, and just wanted to keep in mind, again, he's passed us by. It's not necessarily a huge deal, but as we get later and later in the season, that starts to matter more and more. You've got less games left. Every single one that you miss is going to get amplified, and having a guy that's already through his bye is certainly valuable, especially because you can sort of dodge that. Having a player that doesn't have a bye is obviously better than having one that hasn't had his yet. So just a little feather in his cap there. I do think that Rome is a great target right now. Next, we got one more wide receiver here. It's going to be DK Metcalf. For starters, you got a hard time seeing another game this season where 3 tight ends on the team outscore him in fantasy. You had 4 total passing touchdowns last week by Pittsburgh, all scored by tight ends, 2 for Freiermuth, 1 for Jonnu, and 1 for Darnell Washington. That's just a weird game script there. This is clearly a team that their defense just isn't what they would want it to be. You should never really be giving up 32 points to the ghost of Joe Flacco. I get it. He's got Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, but the staple of this team should be their defense, and it's not. But for fantasy, that's good, right? You obviously want them to find themselves in more shootouts, and knowing that can happen is definitely beneficial for us going forward. He's the clear wide receiver 1 in this offense. They run a ton of 12 personnel, sometimes 3 tight ends on the field. This is a team that just doesn't have any other wide receiver options outside of DK, and typically when you see a lot of tight ends on the field, it does increase the target share for wide receivers in those sets or for the wide receiver in that set, just because, when you're competing with for targets with a tight end, you're more likely to be more open than those guys than if you're competing with a slot receiver and a receiver opposite you. So, again, Metcalf's a clear wide receiver 1 in this offense. I think the offense is going to have to do more going forward than we've seen. He's also another guy that's through his bye already. We love that. He's not a guy that we're going to have to worry about. look at your lineups this week. You got 6 teams on bye this week. It certainly sucks. It makes it tough to fill your lineup. Having guy that's through that, you don't have to worry about the rest. Really worry about that the rest of the way. Definitely like that. We also have Pittsburgh with the 5th easiest strength of schedule the entire rest of season for wide receivers, so we'd love to see that. And the playoff stretch is fantastic. You start the playoffs with Miami and Detroit. 2 straight matchups for DK could easily just break into like wide receiver 1 category. Could easily be a top 12 guy those weeks. And then Cleveland, not a great matchup, but Cleveland does give it up to the wide receiver position a little bit, so it's not as bad of a matchup as you would expect. I think he can legitimately get you to the championship, and if you have to pivot there, you can certainly find something else. I really do view him as like a solid top 20 guy the rest of the way. It's just been a little bit since we got a big game out of him. I think that targeting a guy through his bye off of a bad game, generally wise, especially given the schedule we have down the stretch here. I lied. I got one more wide receiver to go through. It's going to be Jalen Waddle. I think in general people are really concerned about what things are looking like in Miami right now, and I'm right there with you. I do think that Miami is going to have a tough time really keeping the wheels on the rest of the way, but I don't know if they have to keep the wheels on for Waddle to continue to be fantasy relevant. Last man standing in Miami, right? You had Darren Waller go down with a pec strain, going to miss a few weeks. Waller has always been a guy that's been injury prone a little bit, especially over the tail half of his career. He's old, he's up there, coming off an injury. I wouldn't be shocked if we don't see very much of like a relevant Darren Waller the rest of the season. You're competing for targets with Malik Washington, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine at wide receiver. Like Jalen Waddle is all they have outside of Devon Achane now. And the playoff schedule really is what I'm targeting here. You've got 3 straight games that are really setting themselves up to be potential nukes here. You've got Pittsburgh. We just saw how much they gave it up to the Cincinnati offense. Cincinnati, we know what kind of defense they are. And then Tampa Bay, a team that's obviously going to score a lot of points and that you can throw on. You can't run on them, but you can throw on them. So 3 straight games where I really do think Jalen Waddle could go out there and be fantastic for us in the playoffs. There's not really any risk of Tua being benched. They don't have any like future option on that for their franchise and the waiting in the wings there. Like Quinn Ewers is not going to be a threat. You're going to get Tua the rest of the way. It's not going to be great, but Tua is good enough to at least support fantasy relevance for Jalen Waddle. The defense is horrendous. You can run all over them. They're going to give up 30 points every single game. Yeah, the Browns score a season-high fantasy points real-life points and fantasy points, I guess, this last week. And I'm just not really worried about this last game. Like, you had incredibly bad weather, rain, 60 to 80 mile per hour gusts of wind. It just was never going to set itself up. Again, also against a really good Cleveland defense, right? So the matchup was not fantastic. You had a horrendous weather situation. It was just very predictable that Jalen Waddle was going to go out there and have a bad game. But because the vibes in Miami are so bad, because his production this last week was so bad, I think people are going to be willing to sell a little bit low on him. And I definitely think he's a guy that can honestly be a top 15 guy the rest of the way. And it feels sketchy because maybe it is with just the situation there in Miami. But like people aren't scared of rostering Devon Achane. Jalen Waddle's right there as well. I think he's a guy that needs to be on rosters. Is probably a top 15 to 20 guy the rest of the way. It seems like I keep lying. Another receiver I want to highlight. Travis Hunter is a guy that I really want to highlight. Going into his bias, maybe a little bit more available. And I think that in general, people are not necessarily going to buy into him after this last week. And that's why I'm interested here is because he's a guy that's actually should be relatively cheap. It sucks a little bit that he had this blow-up game in garbage time, had 0 points going into halftime, sort of garbage timed his way towards being really good for fantasy this last week. But we might have seen the breakout there for Travis Hunter. We've got Brian Thomas Jr. clearly playing through some sort of injury, whether it's his shoulder or his wrist. I've seen mixed reports. It looks like his shoulder from the injury, but we were seeing some reports earlier in the season that he had sort of a questionable wrist injury. Would really explain why he's been so hesitant over the middle as well. So like things just don't look great for Brian Thomas. Hopefully he can get healthy after the bye and all that. But Travis Hunter is really important to this offense. They didn't play him on defense until the fourth quarter really in this one. Post-bye bumps are really common for rookies, so it's something to be optimistic about for Travis Hunter going into Week 9, and it makes a ton of sense for a guy like Travis Hunter that it would take a little bit for him to get acclimated to the NFL. He's a rookie learning to play 2 different positions in the NFL, right? So it makes sense that he would ramp up a little bit slower. It'd be one thing if they just let him play wide receiver right away, let him play cornerback right away, and then if he just excelled at either one of those. But because he's having to do both, it just obviously was going to take a little bit. I don't think that's entirely shocking. Like I mentioned earlier, you had Brian Thomas Jr. and De'Ami Brown get banged up in this last one. It's possible. We don't really have many reports, and the Jaguars aren't going to have to report on anything for a week there, so you're sort of rolling the dice a little bit in terms of what those injuries shake out to be. But if either one of those guys misses, Travis Hunter's got to be an every single down player for this offense, and he's good enough. Brian Thomas, if he's active, he's obviously going to draw the better coverage. So Travis Hunter is a guy who's shifty, can do a lot with the ball after the catch. I think this offense is going to need to put up a lot of points. Their defense is reeling just a little bit over the last couple of weeks, and if you end up if things hit here for Travis Hunter, he could easily be a top 20 wide receiver the rest of the season. He's got the talent, right? That was never the question. It was just, is he going to get acclimated to the NFL in time? And there's a range of outcomes where he's the one in this offense over Brian Thomas Jr. I don't want to expect it to happen because Brian Thomas clearly we saw it last year. We know Brian Thomas is elite. It hasn't worked out for him yet this season. But there's an opportunity here for Travis Hunter to be great. He should be relatively cheap, and he's the kind of guy that I want to take a shot on because the upside's clearly there with the talent he has. Next up, we got a running back that I'm going to talk about, and it's going to be Chase Brown. I don't want to overreact to this one, but he did finally look relatively respectable last week. You have a professional quarterback under center that I think is doing the right things in terms of checking into run plays when they should happen. The offensive line just looked like it was playing a little bit better as well. And you sort of saw Chase Brown himself seem a little surprised by just how well his team was blocking last week. Just didn't seem like he was ready to hit some of the holes because he hadn't seen so many so far this year. So I think there are better days ahead for him in this offensive line. It's not going to be a great offensive line the rest of the way. They're probably not going to average 7 to 10 yards per carry like they did this last week, but I think you're going to get better efficiency out of Chase Brown than you did to start the season. Joe Flacco obviously gives this offense a much higher floor than a guy like Jake Browning did, so you're going to have at least a little bit of an increased odds of a touchdown every single week. And I know we didn't see it last week, but Joe Flacco certainly is going to check the ball down much more than, or plenty. He's clearly a guy that's going to throw the ball. Or his first read, if it's not there, he's willing to check it down. You're going to get several games this year with Chase Brown getting 5-6 receptions, and that's definitely something you want to be excited about. Chase Brown and the Bengals also have the easiest playoff schedule for running backs of any team across the entire league. And look at these matchups. You get Baltimore and Miami weeks 15 and 16. You can't argue with that. Baltimore is arguably the worst defense in the NFL, and then Miami's pretty clearly the worst run defense in the NFL with what we've seen out of the last 3 weeks for Rico Dowdle, Kamani Vidal, and then Quinshon Judkins. So you can start running backs against the Dolphins. And then Arizona, you see 3 rushing touchdowns to Josh Jacobs. They're not a very good run defense either. There's plenty of opportunity here for Chase Brown to be really useful in the fantasy playoffs. And just with the volume and the involvement in the offense, he's going to be at least a usable running back 2 the rest of the way and could legitimately pop off for 3 weeks when you need him the most. And that's the kind of guy that, if you get into the playoffs with Chase Brown, then he has 3 straight running back 1 weeks because of the matchups. He's going to end up being a guy that's a really important player on terms of percent rostered on the fantasy championship teams. And it doesn't necessarily need to be great all year. If you peak for those 3 weeks, that definitely makes you really valuable, and he's useful enough that I think he can help you get to the playoffs. So Brown's a guy I would target. I think people are pretty done with him, and he's definitely a guy that you can use. And I think there's going to be some great weeks, at least down the stretch there. And we got one more wide receiver here. So I guess we went 5 wide receivers and 1 running back. Nobody really stood out at the quarterback or tight end positions this week, but Quentin Johnson stands out to me. I do still think that he should be the wide receiver 1 in LA the rest of the season. The Chargers clearly are going to be a team that needs to throw a ton going forward. They weren't really able to run the ball. I don't want to overreact to a tougher matchup against the Colts, but the only game they've been able to run the ball really all season was against Miami. It feels like I could have a successful running game against Miami. So there's clearly opportunity here for this team just to have to throw the ball a lot, especially until they get Amari and Hampton back. And I think he's the perfect target if you're someone who needs to get 4 great weeks going forward. Next 4 matchups here are Minnesota. We just saw what both A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith did to them. Tennessee, we know they're horrible. Pittsburgh, you hear the name Pittsburgh, it sounds scary, but Pittsburgh has not been good against wide receivers. And then Jacksonville just got carved up, give up 5 passing touchdowns. 4 straight matchups here, but I do think Quentin Johnson could go out and be really good for fantasy. And I remember, this is last week. I know he wasn't super involved. It was his first week back from a hamstring injury. It makes sense when a guy's coming off of injury. You get a little bit of a acclimation period. Still got a touchdown. They're clearly going to use him in the red zone. And I had several deep targets that just didn't really work out. So I think there are better days ahead here. This Chargers defense is not playing very well right now, so they're going to have to win a lot of shootouts. And Justin Herbert is certainly capable of doing that. 400-plus passing yards this last week. Better days are ahead for Quentin Johnson. I still think he can be a top 15 guy the rest of the way. And I think people are a little bit shaky just because of the last few weeks coupled with the injury. So go get him right now if you can. That'll do it for players that I'm looking to buy low on ahead of week 8. Up next, I'll be going over players that I'd be looking to sell high on. So stay tuned for that video. That one will also come out the same day as this one. And then, of course, if you guys do end up with any specific trade questions, just let me know in the comments. I love interacting with you guys there. It really is part of what makes this fun for me. So I appreciate you guys. If you haven't already, give the video a thumbs up. It helps me out a ton. And I'll catch you guys with the next one. Peace, guys. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.